Get out of the car! Now!
Adrian Ross had barely hung up the gas nozzle when the spotlight hit him. Two officers. A rest stop off I-16. Middle of nowhere, Georgia.
The hell, I'm pumping gas, man.
Did I stutter? Out! Hands where I can see them.
You got no right to!
Pike, pull this animal out before I do it myself.
Pike ripped the door open. Wells grabbed Adrian by the collar and slammed him face first onto the asphalt, cuffs biting into his wrists.
You think you can talk back to me, boy? Your kind don't get to have an attitude.
No charges, no warrant, no reason. Just two badges and a black man who didn't belong. But what happened the next morning? Wells would give anything to take that night back. Because the next morning, both officers realized their careers were already over. The highway stretched long and empty through southern Georgia, the kind of road with the trees pressed in close, and the only light came from your own headlights bouncing off the asphalt. Adrian Ross had been driving for 6 hours. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the steering wheel, keeping time with the low hum of the engine. The sedan ate up miles of nothing: pine forests, the occasional dead armadillo, and exit signs for towns he'd never heard of. Tomorrow morning, he would sit behind a bench for the first time as a federal judge. Not a mock trial, not a moot court exercise. The real thing. His name on the brass plate. He'd spent 22 years building toward that chair. 4 years at Howard, 3 at Yale Law. 15 years grinding through cases as a civil rights attorney, the kind of work that paid in purpose, not money. 700-page briefs, depositions in windowless rooms, clients who cried on the phone at midnight because they didn't think anyone would believe them. And now this. A lifetime appointment. A robe in the garment bag on the back seat, still wrapped in dry cleaning plastic. The gas gauge dipped below a quarter tank. Next town was 40 miles out, but there was a rest stop in 3. Adrian flicked on the blinker, even though there wasn't another car in sight. Old habit. His mother had drilled it into him. Always signal. Always use your manners. Always give them one less reason. The rest stop appeared like a dim island in the dark. A Quick-Mart with half its sign burned out, 2 gas pumps from the previous decade, and a parking lot cracked down the middle where weeds pushed through. A single overhead light buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly yellow wash. Adrian pulled up to the pump, killed the engine, stepped out and stretched, arms above his head, spine popping after hours in the seat. The air hit him thick and warm, heavy with pine sap and old gasoline. Crickets screamed from the tree line. Somewhere behind the building, a bullfrog called out and got no answer. He swiped his card, started the pump, walked toward the Quick-Mart for coffee. The patrol car was parked in the far corner of the lot, tucked behind a dumpster where the light didn't reach. Adrian noticed it the way you notice a wasp on the windowsill. Not alarmed, just aware. Every black man in America develops that radar by the time he's 12. It's not fear, exactly. It's geometry. Calculating angles, distances, sightlines, knowing where you are in relation to the uniform without ever looking directly at it. He pushed through the door. The clerk, a teenager with acne and headphones around his neck, barely glanced up. Adrian poured a large black coffee, grabbed a pack of peanuts, and set them on the counter. $3.78. He paid in cash, left the change, walked back out into the warm dark. The gas pump clicked off. He replaced the nozzle, screwed on the cap, and reached for his car door. Inside the patrol car, 2 figures sat watching. The cabin light was off, but the glow of a laptop screen lit their faces from below. Sergeant Grady Wells, 16 years on the force, built like a fire hydrant, the kind of man who spoke in commands even ordering breakfast. And Officer Danny Pike, 24, fresh from the academy, still young enough to think every shift might be the one that made his career. Wells watched the sedan. watched the man in slacks and a pressed shirt buying coffee at 11:30 at night in the middle of nowhere. He picked up the radio. The spotlight hit Adrian before he heard the engine. 1 second he was standing at the pump, reaching for the gas cap. The next, a wall of white light pinned him against the sedan like a moth on a board. He raised one hand to shield his eyes. The cruiser doors opened in unison. "Step away from the vehicle." Sergeant Grady Wells came first. 16 years in the department had given him a walk. Slow, wide, deliberate. The walk of a man who had never once been told no in uniform. His hand rested on his holster, not gripping, just resting. The way a man rests his hand on a fence he owns. Officer Danny Pike came from the passenger side, 24 years old, 6 months out of the academy, eager in a way that made his movements sharp and twitchy. He circled wide, flanking the sedan from the rear. "License and registration." Adrian reached into his back pocket, slowly. Every black man learns the choreography before he learns to drive. Hands visible, movements announced. No sudden turns. "Here." Wells took the license, held it up to the spotlight, squinted, looked at Adrian, looked back at the card. "Adrian Ross. That your real name?" "It's on the license." "I didn't ask what's on the license. I asked if it's your real name." Wells tucked the card into his shirt pocket like it belonged to him now. "Where you coming from?" "Atlanta." "Where you headed?" "Dalton." "Dalton." Wells repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "What business you got in Dalton?" "Work." "What kind of work?" "Legal work." Wells glanced at Pike. Pike smirked, the kind of smirk that said, "Sure, buddy." "Legal work, at midnight, driving through Telfair County." Wells leaned against the sedan, Adrian's sedan, put his full weight on it like he was leaning on his own truck at a barbecue. "You know what that sounds like to me." Adrian didn't answer. "That sounds like a story. And I've heard a lot of stories on this road." Wells pushed off the car and stepped closer. Close enough that Adrian could smell the dip tobacco on his breath. "Pop the trunk." "No." The word landed like a stone in still water. Pike's hand went to his holster. Wells didn't move. He just tilted his head, the way a dog does when it hears something it doesn't understand. "What did you say?" "I said no. You don't have probable cause, and I haven't consented to a search." "Probable cause." Wells tasted the words, smiled. Not a warm smile. The smile of a man whose patience was a performance, and the performance was ending. "You hear that, Pike? He knows the vocabulary." "I hear it." "Let me tell you something about probable cause." Wells jabbed a finger into Adrian's chest. Hard. "I decide what's probable. I decide what's cause. Out here, I'm the law. You're just a guy with a nice car and no good reason to have it." "I want your badge number." Wells laughed, a short bark that echoed off the gas pumps. "Badge number? That's cute." He turned to Pike. "Write that down, would you? Man wants my badge number." Pike didn't write anything down. "Turn around." "I'm not." "Turn around." Adrian didn't move. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The fluorescent light above the pump buzzed and flickered. A moth circled it once, twice, and flew into the dark. Then Wells grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him. Adrian's chest hit the hood of the sedan, his cheek pressed flat against the warm metal. Pike was on him in a second, hands behind his back, cuffs ratcheting tight. "You're making a mistake," Adrian said. Quiet. Not a threat. A fact. "Only mistake out here tonight is yours." Wells patted him on the back the way you'd pat a dog that finally sat down. "You should have just popped the trunk." They put him in the back of the cruiser, the door shut with a sound like a vault closing. Through the cage partition, Adrian watched Wells walk back to the sedan, open the driver's door, and start rifling through the glove box. The garment bag hung from the hook above the rear passenger window. Black fabric, brass zipper, a small embroidered seal on the front. Neither officer looked at it. Not once. The drive to the county station took 11 minutes. Adrian counted every one of them. He sat in the back of the cruiser with his hands cuffed behind him and his shoulders burning from the angle. The partition smelled like old sweat and disinfectant. Someone had scratched the words, "Good luck," into the plastic with a fingernail. Wells drove. Pike sat in the passenger seat, twisting around every 30 seconds to look at Adrian through the cage. Not checking on him, studying him. The way a kid studies something he caught in a jar. "You know," Wells said, not looking in the mirror, "most people just cooperate. Open the trunk, let us take a look, everybody goes home happy. But you had to be difficult." Adrian said nothing. "Silent treatment now? That's fine. We got all night." The station was a flat brick building at the edge of town, the kind of place that looked like it had been built in the 70s and hadn't been touched since. A flag hung limp from a pole out front. The parking lot was empty, except for 2 other cruisers and a pickup truck with a department sticker on the bumper. They pulled him out of the car by his arm. Not gently. Wells walked him through the front door with one hand on the back of his neck, fingers digging in, steering him like cargo. The desk sergeant looked up from his computer. A heavy-set man with reading glasses pushed down his nose. "What have we got?" "Suspicious individual. Rest stop off I-16. Uncooperative." Wells pushed Adrian toward the booking counter. "Nice car, no explanation. Got mouthy when we asked questions." The desk sergeant looked at Adrian, looked at the suit, looked at the cuffs. Something flickered across his face. Maybe doubt? Maybe recognition that something was off. It disappeared in a second. "Name?" "Adrian Ross." "Address?" Adrian gave his Atlanta address. The desk sergeant typed it in. Slowly, one finger at a time. "Occupation?" "Attorney." Wells snorted behind him. "Yeah, and I'm the governor." Pike laughed. The desk sergeant didn't. They fingerprinted him, rolled each finger across the ink pad, and pressed it to the card with a kind of bored efficiency that said they'd done this 1,000 times and stopped caring at 200. The ink stained his fingers black. Adrian stared at it, the dark smudges across the hands that had signed a federal oath 9 days ago. They took his mugshot, front and side. The camera flash was too bright and left a green smear across his vision. The height chart behind him marked him at 6'1". They wrote it down as 6 feet even. Small thing, meaningless. But Adrian noticed. He noticed everything now. "Empty your pockets." Wallet, keys, phone. A pen, Mont Blanc, a gift from his mentor when he passed the bar. The officer handling the bag looked at the pen, turned it over, set it down without comment. "Belt and shoes." Adrian removed them. The concrete floor was cold through his socks. They handed him a plastic bag with his belongings and pointed him down a hallway. "Cell 4, end of the hall." The holding cell was 8 feet by 10. A concrete bench along one wall. A steel toilet with no seat. A single bulb behind a cage on the ceiling that buzzed at a frequency designed to make sleep impossible. The walls were painted the color of old teeth, a yellow that might have once been white, but had surrendered decades ago. Adrian sat on the bench. The metal was cold enough to feel through his suit pants. He placed his hands on his knees, straight-backed, still. Wells appeared at the bars 20 minutes later, leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, the posture of a man visiting a zoo. "Comfortable?" Adrian looked at him, said nothing. "You know, this whole thing could have been over in 5 minutes. You pop the trunk, trunk's clean, we shake hands and you drive off. But you had to make it a thing." Wells picked at something in his teeth. Pride, that's what it is. Your people always got too much pride for your own good. I'd like to make my phone call. In the morning. The law says what I say it says in this building. Wells tapped the bars twice with his knuckle. The ring of metal on metal echoed down the empty hallway. Get some sleep, counselor. He walked away. His boots made a slow, heavy rhythm on the tile floor, each step deliberate, each step saying, I own this hallway and everything in it, including you. Adrian listened until the footsteps faded. Then he closed his eyes. Not to sleep, to think. Fourth Amendment. Unreasonable search and seizure. No probable cause established. No consent given. Arrest without charge. Section 1983. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Terry v. Ohio. An officer may conduct a brief investigative stop, but only with reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Buying coffee and pumping gas is not criminal activity. Every statute, every precedent, every violation. He filed them in his mind the way he'd filed 10,000 case documents over 22 years. Clean, ordered, devastating. The bulb buzzed above him. Somewhere down the hall, a pipe dripped. Adrian Ross sat in the dark and waited for morning. Hours passed in pieces. The bulb never turned off. It just hung there behind its cage, humming at the same dead frequency, throwing a pale light that turned everything the same shade of sick. Adrian lost track of time somewhere after the second hour. There was no window, no clock, just the hum and the drip, and the occasional sound of boots passing down the hallway. He didn't lie down. The bench was narrow enough that rolling off was a certainty, and the floor was the kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it climbs inside. So he sat, hands on his knees, back straight. The way his grandfather used to sit in the front pew on Sundays, rigid, dignified, like posture was the last thing they couldn't take from you. His grandfather had been a janitor in Macon for 41 years, cleaned the same courthouse where white attorneys walked past him without looking. He used to say, "The building doesn't care who sweeps the floor or who swings the gavel. Only people care about that. And people get things wrong." Adrian could hear that voice now, clear as a bell, right through the concrete walls. Twice during the night, officers walked past his cell. The first one, a young woman with a ponytail and a clipboard, glanced in and kept moving. Her face said nothing. Her pace said everything. She didn't want to be part of whatever this was. The second was an older officer, gray at the temples. He stopped, looked at Adrian's suit, looked at the empty charge sheet clipped to the cell door, opened his mouth, closed it, walked away. Adrian watched him go. In 22 years of law, he'd seen that look 100 times. The look of a man who knows something is wrong and has already decided it's not his problem. Around 3 in the morning, or what he guessed was 3, the building fell completely silent. No footsteps, no radio chatter, just the bulb and the pipe and Adrian's own breathing. He used the time not to be angry. Anger was a luxury that required energy he couldn't afford to spend. Instead, he worked. Quietly, methodically. The way he'd worked every case for 2 decades. He replayed the stop. Every word, every gesture. Wells approaching with his hand on the holster. The demand for license and registration. Lawful, technically. The questions that followed. Where are you from? Where are you going? What kind of work? Fishing. Legal, but fishing. The demand to pop the trunk. Unlawful without consent or probable cause. Adrian's refusal. Lawful. The arrest that followed. Unlawful. He replayed the booking. No Miranda warning. No charge read. no attorney access. The desk sergeant had processed him on Wells's verbal description alone. Suspicious individual, uncooperative. Those weren't charges, they were adjectives. He thought about the garment bag, still hanging in his car, still unexamined. A judicial robe with the seal of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia embroidered on the breast. If either officer had unzipped it just once, this night would have ended very differently. But they didn't look. People like Wells never look. They see what they've already decided to see, and everything else might as well be invisible. At some point, Adrian's phone call came through. Not because they remembered, because the shift changed. A new officer, name tag reading Collins, appeared at the bars at 4:45. Younger than Pike, less sure of himself. He unlocked the cell door with the expression of a man defusing a bomb he didn't build. "You get one call." Adrian stood, followed Collins to a wall-mounted phone near the intake desk. Dialed the only number that mattered. His clerk, Sandra Whitmore, answered on the second ring. Her voice was alert, the voice of someone used to calls before dawn. "Judge Ross?" "Sandra, I may be late this morning." A pause. "How late?" "I'm not sure yet. I'm at the Telfair County Sheriff's Station." A longer pause. He could hear her processing. Sandra had been a judicial clerk for 19 years. She'd heard a lot of things. This was new. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Don't contact anyone. Don't make calls. I'll be there." "Yes, sir." He hung up. Collins walked him back to the cell, locked the door, looked at him for a second too long. "Is there anything?" "No," Adrian said. "Thank you." The cell door clanged shut. Adrian sat back down. Same bench, same posture, same buzzing light. But something had shifted. Not in the room. In him. For 22 years, Adrian Ross had believed in the system. Not blindly, not naively, the way a surgeon believes in the scalpel, with full knowledge of how much damage it can do and a steady commitment to using it precisely. Tonight, the scalpel had been used on him. Tomorrow morning, he'd pick it up again. The pipe dripped. The bulb hummed. Outside, somewhere past the walls and the parking lot and the empty road, the first thin line of gray crept across the Georgia sky. Morning was coming. The new shift sergeant's name was Dawson. He arrived at 6:47 with a styrofoam cup of coffee and a face that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He sat behind the intake desk, pulled up the overnight log, and started reading. It took him less than 2 minutes to find the problem. "Wells brought in a guy last night. Rest stop off I-16. He looked at the screen, scrolled down, looked again. "There's no charge here." Collins, who was finishing his shift, shrugged. "Sergeant Wells said suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity isn't a charge. It's not even a reason." Dawson pulled up the arrest entry, read it twice, took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "There's no probable cause documented. No contraband. No warrants. No nothing." He stood up, walked down the hallway. His footsteps were different from Wells's, quick, purposeful, the walk of a man cleaning up someone else's mess. The cell door opened. Adrian looked up from the bench, same posture he'd held all night. "Mr. Ross, I'm Sergeant Dawson. I've reviewed your intake and—" He paused. The words tasted wrong, and he knew it. "You're free to go. I apologize for the inconvenience." Inconvenience. The word hung in the air between them like a bad joke. 7 hours in a holding cell. Fingerprinted. Mugshot taken. Face cut open on a gas station parking lot. Inconvenience. Adrian stood, straightened his suit jacket, buttoned it with the same hands that still had ink stains along the fingertips. "Where are my belongings?" "Front desk. We'll process you out." The paperwork took 12 minutes. They returned his wallet, his keys, his phone, the Mont Blanc pen. Everything accounted for. Everything, technically, undamaged. Adrian signed the release form with steady hands. Dawson walked him to the front door, held it open. Another small gesture, meant to sand down the edges of what had happened. Adrian walked through without looking at him. Pike was still at his desk in the bullpen. Adrian could see him through the window, feet up, scrolling his phone, a gas station breakfast burrito in one hand. He didn't look up, didn't notice, probably didn't care. Outside, the morning hit Adrian like a wall. Warm air, bright sun, birdsong, the whole world carrying on like nothing had happened. His car was in the impound lot behind the building. They'd left it unlocked. The glove box was still open from Wells's search. Papers from the center console were scattered across the passenger seat. The garment bag hung untouched. Adrian gathered the papers, closed the glove box, sat in the driver's seat for a long moment with his hands on the wheel. The leather was warm from the sun. The cut on his cheek had dried into a thin, dark line. He could feel it pull every time he moved his jaw. He checked the mirror. The bruise along his jawline was turning purple. A crescent-shaped scrape ran from his cheekbone to his ear where the asphalt had bitten in. He touched it once, pulled his hand away. Then he drove. Not home, not to a hospital, not to an attorney's office. He drove north on I-16, merged onto I-75, and kept going. The courthouse was 43 minutes away. He had a docket at 9. At a gas station, a different one, larger, well-lit, busy, he stopped. Used the restroom to wash the dried blood off his face. The water ran pink in the white sink. He patted his cheek dry with a paper towel, careful around the edges of the cut. He changed into a fresh shirt, knotted his tie in the mirror, adjusted the collar so it sat just below the bruise. He didn't try to hide it. Back in the car, he reached over the seat and unzipped the garment bag. The robe was black and pressed and perfect. He hung it from the hook above the window, the same hook it had hung from all night while 2 officers searched everything around it and never once looked up. Adrian Ross pulled back onto the highway. The sun was full now. The road was clear. 43 minutes. The Whitfield County Federal Courthouse sat at the end of an oak-lined street in downtown Dalton, Georgia. 3 stories of limestone and glass, built in the 90s to replace the old one that had finally given up on its foundation. A row of columns along the front, an American flag snapping in the morning breeze. The kind of building designed to make you feel small when you walked in. Adrian parked in the reserved lot behind the building. Space number 1. A small placard bolted to the wall read, "Reserved, Judge A. Ross." The placard was new. The screws were still silver. He entered through the rear door, badge in hand. The security guard, an older man named Hector who'd worked the building for 11 years, looked at the badge, looked at Adrian's face, and did a small double-take. "Morning, Your Honor. You, He gestured vaguely at his own cheek. "I'm fine, Hector. Thank you." The hallway was long and quiet. His shoes clicked on the marble floor. Past the clerk's office, past the law library, past the portraits of every judge who'd served in this district. All white faces going back 130 years. There was an empty frame at the end of the row. His frame. His photograph hadn't been hung yet. Sandra Whitmore was waiting outside his chambers. 53 years old, 5'2", hair pulled back in a bun tight enough to survive a hurricane. She'd clerked for 3 federal judges before Adrian and had a reputation for 2 things: flawless preparation and 0 tolerance for nonsense. She saw the cut on his face and the bruise along his jaw. Her eyes widened, then they narrowed. "What happened?" "Long night." That's not an answer. It's the one I have right now. Adrian opened the door to his chambers. Walk me through the docket. Sandra followed him in. The office was large and sparse. He'd only moved in 3 days ago. Boxes still lined one wall. The desk was mahogany and older than the building itself, inherited from the previous judge. A brass nameplate sat front and center. Honorable Adrian Ross, United States District Judge. Sandra opened the docket file. You have 4 matters this morning: 2 motions, a scheduling conference, and an evidentiary hearing. The hearing. Which case? Patterson versus Whitfield County Sheriff's Department. Adrian's hand stopped mid-reach for his coffee. Just for a second. Less than a second. Sandra noticed anyway. Civil rights action, she continued. Plaintiff alleges a pattern of racially motivated traffic stops by the Whitfield County Sheriff's Department. 14 documented incidents over 8 months, all black motorists. 12 resulted in no charges. Adrian took the file, opened it, read the summary paragraph, then read it again. 14 stops, 12 with no charges, all black motorists, all on rural highways in Telfair and Whitfield counties, all between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. The plaintiff, a man named James Patterson, a schoolteacher from Warner Robins, had been pulled over 3 times in 4 months. The last time they searched his car for 45 minutes and found nothing but textbooks and a lunchbox. Adrian closed the file, set it on the desk, placed both hands flat on the mahogany surface, and stared at the wood grain for a long moment. Judge Ross, do you need to recuse? The question was precise. Sandra knew the rules. If a judge has a personal connection to a case, financial interest, family involvement, prior relationship with a party, recusal is mandatory. But Adrian hadn't been a party to this case. He hadn't been a plaintiff or a witness. He'd been a victim of the same department. But he wasn't part of this litigation. His experience from last night was separate, legally separate. Ethically, the line was thinner. He knew it. Sandra knew it. No, Adrian said. I don't. Sandra held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded. Once. The plaintiff's team will present first. They're bringing 3 witnesses and body camera footage from 2 of the stops. The defense has filed a motion to exclude the footage. You'll need to rule on that before testimony begins. And the defense witnesses? Sandra checked the list. 4 character witnesses for the department. 2 supervisors and 2 officers. She paused, looked at the names. Sergeant Grady Wells and Officer Daniel Pike are both on the list. She said the names the way you read ingredients on a label. Routine, unremarkable. She had no reason to know those names. She had no reason to notice Adrian's jaw tighten when he heard them. They'll be in my courtroom. Yes, sir. Scheduled for the afternoon session. Adrian stood, walked to the window. Downtown Dalton spread out below. Quiet streets, a few people heading to work, a coffee shop opening its doors. A normal Tuesday morning for everyone except him. He turned back to Sandra. I'll need the full case file, every exhibit, every deposition, and pulled the department's internal affairs records for the last 3 years. Sandra was already writing. Anything else? No. He reached for the garment bag, unzipped it, pulled out the robe. The fabric was heavy in his hands, cool and black and certain. He put it on, adjusted the collar. The bruise on his jaw sat just above the neckline, visible to anyone who looked. He didn't adjust it further. Call the courtroom. Tell them I'm ready. All rise. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia is now in session. The Honorable Judge Adrian Ross presiding. The courtroom stood. Attorneys on both sides. The plaintiff, James Patterson, a 41-year-old schoolteacher in a borrowed suit, sat behind the plaintiff's table with his hands folded. The gallery was half full. a reporter from the Dalton Daily Citizen in the third row, 2 law students from Mercer with notebooks open. And in the fourth row, on the defense side, Sergeant Grady Wells and Officer Danny Pike sat in dress uniform. Adrian entered from the side door, robe on, back straight, the cut on his cheek and the bruise along his jaw visible under the courtroom lights. He climbed the 3 steps to the bench, sat down, and opened the case file. He did not look at the fourth row. Not yet. Good morning. We are here in the matter of Patterson versus Whitfield County Sheriff's Department, case number 422-CV-0118. His voice filled the room, steady, resonant, practiced. The voice of a man who had spent 15 years in courtrooms before he ever sat above one. This is an evidentiary hearing on the plaintiff's claims under Title 42, Section 1983 of the United States Code, alleging a pattern of racially discriminatory traffic stops in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments. He looked up from the file, scanned the room. His eyes passed over the defense table, the gallery, and landed, briefly, almost accidentally, on the fourth row. Pike saw him first. It took 3 seconds. Pike's eyes moved from the nameplate on the bench to the judge's face, to the cut on the cheek, to the bruise on the jaw. His mouth opened slightly. His hand shot sideways and gripped Wells's forearm. Wells was reading something on his phone. He looked up, annoyed. Followed Pike's gaze to the bench. The recognition was not instant. It came in stages. First, confusion. The face was familiar but out of context, like seeing your dentist at a funeral. Then alignment, the features clicking into place. The cheekbone, the jawline, the cut. That specific cut, on that specific cheek, in that specific shape. The cut that Wells himself had put there 11 hours ago on a gas station parking lot. His face went white. Not pale, white. The color of paper. The color of a man watching his own life change in real time. Adrian held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he looked away. Back to the file. Back to work. We'll begin with a preliminary matter. The defense has filed a motion to exclude body camera footage from the incidents of March 14th and April 22nd. I've reviewed the motion and the plaintiff's response. He turned a page. The motion is denied. The footage is admissible. The defense attorney, a tall man named Caldwell in a navy suit, stood halfway. Your Honor, if I may— You may not. The footage meets the requirements for authentication under Rule 901 and is relevant under Rule 401. We'll proceed. Plaintiff, call your first witness. The plaintiff's attorney, a woman named Grace Holliday, mid-30s, from the ACLU's Atlanta office, stood. The plaintiff calls James Patterson. Patterson took the stand, swore the oath, and then he told his story. 3 stops in 4 months. Always at night. Always on rural roads. Always alone. The first time they told him his taillight was out. It wasn't. The second time they said he matched a description. He didn't. The third time they didn't bother with a reason at all. They pulled me over on Route 23, about 10 miles south of here, Patterson said. His voice was quiet but steady, the voice of a man who had practiced this in the mirror. 2 officers. They told me to step out. They searched my car for 45 minutes, opened every bag, every container, pulled the spare tire out of the trunk. What did they find? Textbooks, a lunchbox, a Bible my mother gave me. Were you charged with anything? No, ma'am. Were you given a reason for the stop? No, ma'am. In the fourth row, Wells sat rigid. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. Pike sat beside him, bouncing his knee so hard the bench creaked. The second witness was Darnell Crawford, 26, a UPS driver. Pulled over twice in 3 weeks on I-16. Same stretch of road, same time of night. Same result. Searched, detained, released without charges. "They made me sit on the curb for an hour," Crawford said. "Cars passing by, people staring. They went through my whole truck, found nothing but packages with other people's names on them." He paused. "I called in sick the next 2 days. I couldn't get back in the truck." The third witness was Linda Osei, 58, a registered nurse driving home from a 12-hour shift. Pulled over at 1 in the morning. She was still in her scrubs. "He shined the light in my face and asked me where I stole the car," she said. "I told him it was my car. I've had it for 6 years. He said, 'Sure you have.' Then he made me stand outside in the cold while he ran my plates. Twice." "Were you charged?" "No." "Were you given a reason?" "He said I was driving too slow for the speed limit." A pause. "I was going 53 in a 55. Adrian wrote notes. He wrote them carefully, in the same neat handwriting he'd used on 10,000 legal pads. His face showed nothing. Not anger, not recognition. Not the fact that every single detail, the flashlight, the tone, the assumption, the search, the absence of reason, mirrored his own night. Beat for beat, word for word. He didn't need to show it. The record was building itself. Wells hadn't moved in 20 minutes. He sat with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor 6 feet in front of him. Not watching the witnesses, not watching the judge, watching nothing. The posture of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was made of glass, and it was already cracking. Pike was worse. His face had gone from white to gray. A thin line of sweat ran from his temple to his jaw. His dress uniform, pressed and perfect an hour ago, was dark under the arms. The testimony continued. 3 more witnesses scheduled for the afternoon. Body camera footage queued. Internal affairs records flagged. And behind the bench, Adrian Ross turned another page. The cut on his cheek caught the light every time he moved. A small wound, already healing. But in this courtroom, it was the loudest thing in the room. The afternoon session began at 1:30. The courtroom was fuller now. Word had spread, the way it always does in small towns, through text messages and parking lot conversations, and someone telling someone who told someone else. The gallery had filled with faces Adrian didn't recognize. Local press, a few retired attorneys, 2 city council members in the back row, and in the 4th row, still in dress uniform, still in the same seats, Sergeant Grady Wells and Officer Danny Pike. They hadn't left for lunch. Pike had gone to the bathroom once. Wells hadn't moved at all. "The defense calls Sergeant Grady Wells." Wells stood. It took him longer than it should have. His legs seemed uncertain beneath him, like the floor had shifted and he hadn't found his balance. He walked to the witness stand, the same confident stride from last night, stripped down to something mechanical, automatic, empty. He placed his hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." His voice cracked on "do." A hairline fracture. The court reporter looked up. Adrian looked at him. Directly. For the first time since the hearing began. "Sergeant Wells, please state your full name and rank for the record." Wells's eyes met Adrian's. Up close, 15 feet, the cut on the judge's cheek was unmistakable. The shape, the placement, the exact mark that asphalt leaves on skin when a man's face is pressed into it by force. Grady Allen Wells, Sergeant, Whitfield County Sheriff's Department. His hands trembled on the railing of the witness box. Barely visible, but visible. Defense Attorney Caldwell approached. "Sergeant Wells, how long have you served with the department?" 16 years. "And in those 16 years, how would you describe the department's approach to traffic stops?" "Professional. By the book. We follow standard operating procedures." Are those procedures race neutral? Yes, sir. Are officers trained in constitutional limitations on stops and searches? Yes, sir. Annual training. Thank you. Caldwell returned to his seat. He seemed satisfied. The answers were clean and rehearsed. That was the problem. Grace Holliday stood. She straightened her jacket, picked up a single sheet of paper, walked to the podium with the unhurried confidence of someone holding a winning hand. Sergeant Wells, you said your department follows standard operating procedures for traffic stops, is that correct? That's correct. And those procedures require documented probable cause before conducting a vehicle search? Yes. And they require a stated reason for initiating the stop? Yes. I'd like to direct your attention to the incident of March 14th involving James Patterson. She placed a document on the overhead projector. This is the department's own incident report. Can you read the stated reason for the stop? Wells looked at the screen, swallowed. Driving erratically. Mr. Patterson's dashcam footage, which we'll play now, shows him driving 38 miles per hour in a 35 zone, in a straight line, for 6 uninterrupted minutes before the stop. She pressed play. The courtroom watched 12 seconds of the most unremarkable driving ever filmed. Does that look erratic to you, Sergeant? I wasn't the officer on that stop. No, but you were the supervising sergeant who signed off on the report. Your signature is at the bottom. She pointed. Right there. Wells said nothing. Let me ask you a broader question, Sergeant. In the last 12 months, how many traffic stops has your department conducted on this stretch of I-16 between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? I don't have that number off the top of my head. I do. 114. Of those 114 stops, 89 involved black motorists. That's 78%. She let the number breathe. The county population is 19% black. Can you explain that discrepancy? Different factors. Time of day, traffic patterns. Traffic patterns. Holliday repeated it the way Wells had repeated Dalton the night before, like it tasted wrong. Sergeant Wells, have you ever detained an individual without probable cause? The question landed like a trap door. Wells's eyes flicked to Adrian, just for a heartbeat. The judge's face was stone. The cut on his cheek caught the overhead light. No, ma'am. The lie filled the courtroom like smoke. It hung in the air between the witness stand and the bench, between the man who told it and the man who knew in his bones, in the scrape on his face, in the bruise on his jaw, exactly what that word was worth. Adrian wrote something in his notes. One line. His expression didn't change. Holliday continued. She played the body camera footage from 2 other stops. In each one, the same pattern. No stated reason, aggressive search, no charges, release without explanation. In one clip, an officer could be heard saying, "Nice car for this neighborhood." The courtroom murmured. She called Pike next. Pike's testimony lasted 8 minutes. He answered every question with, "Yes, ma'am," or "No, ma'am," or "I was following Sergeant Wells's instructions." His knee bounced the entire time. His voice never rose above a whisper. At 4:17, both sides rested. Adrian gathered his notes, straightened the file, looked out at the courtroom, the plaintiff, the defense, the gallery, the press, and 2 officers in the 4th row who hadn't looked up in over an hour. I've heard the testimony. I've reviewed the exhibits, the body camera footage, and the department's internal records. His voice was measured, every word chosen, every pause deliberate. The evidence establishes a clear and well-documented pattern of racially discriminatory traffic stops conducted by the Whitfield County Sheriff's Department in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution. He turned a page. The department failed to establish legitimate, race-neutral justifications for the disproportionate targeting of black motorists. The testimony of the plaintiffs was credible, consistent, and corroborated by the department's own records. The testimony of the defense was not. He looked at Wells, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something worse. Clarity. This court orders the following relief. 1. Immediate implementation of an independent oversight body to monitor all traffic stop activity within the department. 2. Mandatory retraining of all officers on constitutional search and seizure requirements to be completed within 90 days. 3. All body cameras are to remain active during the entirety of every traffic stop, with footage preserved for a minimum of 2 years. 4. Compensatory damages to each plaintiff in the amount to be determined in a subsequent proceeding. He closed the file. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. 1 strike. The sound of it echoed off the limestone walls and the high ceiling and the polished wood. A single, clean, final note. Wells sat in the 4th row with his hands on his knees. The same posture Adrian had held in the cell. The same stillness. But a different kind. The stillness of a man who had just heard the first crack in everything he'd built. He didn't stand when the courtroom rose. The courtroom emptied slowly. James Patterson hugged Grace Holliday in the hallway, a long, wordless embrace between two people who had just won something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Wells and Pike were the last to leave. They walked out side by side, but not together. Not the way partners walk. The way strangers walk, who happen to be heading for the same exit. Pike stared at the floor. Wells stared straight ahead. In the lobby, a reporter tried to get a comment. Wells pushed past her. Pike mumbled, "No comment," and followed him through the glass doors. They got into separate cars. That detail would mean something later. Adrian didn't watch them leave. He was in his chambers, hanging the robe back in the garment bag. The same bag. The same hook. The same brass zipper that 2 officers had walked past 12 hours ago, without a glance. Sandra appeared in the doorway. She'd watched the entire hearing. She'd seen the cut under the courtroom lights and done the math. "Good first day," she said. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. Good first day. 3 weeks later, the department placed Wells on administrative leave. The internal affairs investigation expanded beyond the Patterson case. 7 additional complaints surfaced, all from black motorists, all from the same stretch of I-16, all involving Wells or officers under his direct supervision. 2 more officers were suspended. The department's overtime budget was gutted to pay for the mandated oversight body. Pike resigned before the investigation reached him. Badge turned in on a Tuesday morning, gone by noon. No statement, no forwarding address. Someone at the station said he moved out of state. Someone else said he just stopped answering his phone. Wells fought it, hired a lawyer, filed a grievance claiming the ruling was biased. His attorney submitted a complaint alleging Judge Ross had a conflict of interest, though he never specified what that conflict was. He couldn't. Specifying it would mean admitting what happened at the rest stop. And admitting that would mean confessing to the exact conduct the court had just condemned. The complaint was dismissed in 11 days. 6 months later, the Patterson decision was cited in 3 civil rights cases across Georgia. A professor at Emory Law included it in her fall syllabus. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a feature with the headline, "The Judge Who Didn't Need to Say a Word." Adrian never spoke publicly about that night. No interviews, no op-eds. The cut healed into a thin scar along his cheekbone, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Every morning he drove the same route to the courthouse, and every morning he passed the exit for that rest stop off I-16. He never stopped there again. He didn't need to. The Quick Mart closed 8 months later. The pumps came out. The sign came down. The parking lot cracked further, and the weeds took over for good. But the courthouse stayed open, and behind the bench, Adrian Ross kept showing up. Every morning, same robe, same posture, same steady hand.
A judicial role, who in that car all night, and need the official ever look up. That's how bias works. It only see what it already decided to see. Well, spent 16 years believing his badge was the final word. Thus, on the dark highway, power men control who were stopped, who were searched, who were thrown on the asphalt. But power built on fears had an expiration date. It only survived until it missed something it can wreck. Adrian didn't need to announce who he was. He didn't need revenger. He sat in that cell with ink on his finger and a cast on his face. And when morning came, he wrote 43 minutes, put on that roll, and let the evidence speak. 22 years of preparation meeting, one night of injustice. The system that failed him became the very instrument that protected 14 others just like him. But here's the real question. When the person being wronged had no rope, no bench, no courtroom, waiting for them the next morning, the justice still show up. And if it doesn't, whose responsibility it does? Yours, mine, or the system we all agree to live under? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story moves you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you are new. I'll see you in the next one.